7th grade is all about positive and negative operations. Operating with numbers using positives and negatives, different signs. So here we have all the different combinations between the first addend being positive or negative 2.5 and then the sum being positive or negative 8. So what is the missing addend in each of these slightly different equations? Negative 2.5 plus what equals negative 8? What do I add to negative 2.5 to get to negative 8? I do not need to cross over 0. I'm staying in the negative range. So if I'm starting negative and I'm ending negative, I'm going to be adding a negative number. What is the distance from negative 2.5 to negative 8? Well, I know from negative 8 to negative 3 is going to be negative 5, and then I need that additional 0.5 to get from negative 2.5 to negative 8. Solving this with an equation would look like this. Negative 2.5 plus x equals negative 8. I would add 2.5 to both sides. So x equals negative 8 plus 2.5. And then we get x equals negative 5.5. Moving on, 2.5 plus what equals negative 8. Now my addend and my sum are on opposite sides of 0. So I need to think about what am I going to add to 2.5 to get over 0 and to negative 8. I know from 0 to negative 8 will be negative 8. And then to get from 0 to 2.5, that's going to be negative 2.5. So the sum of negative 8 and negative 2.5 is negative 10.5. Using an equation, I would do 2.5 plus x plus what equals negative 8. I would subtract 2.5 from both sides of my equation, and I would get x equals negative 8 minus 2.5, which is negative 10.5. Moving on, if I'm at negative 2.5 and I want to get to positive 8, you guessed it, the addend and the sum are on different sides of 0. How can I get from negative 2.5 to positive 8? I need to add enough to get to 0, so I'm going to add positive 2.5, and then I have to add an additional 8 to get to 8. So that's a total sum of 10.5. Using an algebraic equation, I would do negative 2.5 plus x plus what equals 8. I would add 2.5 to both sides, and I would get x equals 8 plus 2.5, which is 10.5. Okay? When you add 2.5 to negative 2.5, it cancels to 0. That's why we're doing that there. Or when you add or subtract, when you add negative 2.5 or subtract 2.5 from positive 2.5, it goes to 0. Finally, if we're at positive 2.5 and we need to get to positive 8, we do not need to cross over 0. Okay, so it's going to be less than 8. I don't need to get from 0 to 8. I need to get from 2.5 to 8. So what I need to think about is, how do I get to a whole number? Well, a half takes me to 3, and then to get from 3 to 8, it's 5 more. So that's 5.5. Using an algebraic equation, it would look like this. 2.5 plus what equals 8. I would subtract 2.5 from both sides to get x by itself, and I would end up with x equals 8 minus 2.5, which is 5.5.